Hello Year 5s and welcome to today's lesson. For today's lesson you will need an A4 piece of paper, preferably blank, a pencil and a ruler. You can turn the page. Come on Mr. PowerPoint. So, I'm just going to review what we did last week and I want you to have a little think. Who can actually remember what we did last week? It's felt like a very long week. And what does that word architecture mean? What did we do last week? What does the word architecture mean? I'll give you a few seconds to think about it. Fantastic. I heard some of you saying in the distance that we created mind maps of interesting and fabulous buildings. If you said that, give yourself a thumbs up because you were right. And then architecture, I was so proud of all of the people that submitted their work because you spelled architecture correctly. And that is the art or practice of designing and constructing buildings. Now, this week we are moving on to drawing, and this drawing lesson is a two-part lesson. In today's lesson, you are going to be selecting an image of a building. These are local buildings, you might recognise some of them. You are going to use a grid to help you with proportions, and you're going to aim to use faint construction lines. And I want to see those sketching lines, not solid dark lines, and basic shapes to support your drawing. Now, real focus today is going to be on proportion. Are things in proportion? What does that word proportion mean? So are they the correct size? When you start to enlarge something, are you still keeping it in proportion? We're going to be looking at size, faint construction lines, so light feathery lines, and basic shapes. So we're going to be using some of those basic mathematical shapes that you use in maths. For example, square, circle, triangle, those basic shapes that you use in maths. And my star challenge for you, and it sounds easy but it's really tricky, is to use and develop your accurate proportions when you are enlarging something, to still keep the proportions accurate. Now, these are some examples of finished pieces. So these are examples of finished pieces of children who did this work last year. As I said, it's a two-part lesson. So these pieces are the finished pieces which took them approximately 2 hours to complete. So don't expect to complete your pieces today. Now, these are the local buildings I want you to look at. I wonder if any of you might recognise some of them. I was in school on last Monday and I went around town looking for some interesting buildings that I thought that you would enjoy drawing. As you can see, some of them are parts of buildings, and some of them are other structures. So can you recognise these buildings? If you can't recognise them, next time that you get to have your daily walk, see if you can spot them in town. The next thing I want you to think about, looking at these buildings again, really studying them, these designs, which one of these designs do you think will be the easiest to draw? And which one do you think will be the hardest to draw? And why? Which one would be the easiest and which one would be the hardest and why? Now, if you said that this building would be the easiest, I would somewhat agree with you. Middle, hardest. Okay, the reason I feel that this is the easiest is because it's got lots of basic shapes. Squares, rectangles, lots of basic shapes, and I've also zoomed in on the image. This is a lot more detail, still sticking with the basic shapes, but then there's a lot more final details like the brickwork and the window. The third image, the Market Cross, they're more irregular shapes, not as many basic shapes, and it's at a slight angle, so it makes it a lot harder to draw. So today I want you to decide which image you feel you are capable of drawing. Choose an image which you feel you have the skills to draw. successfully. Skills to draw successfully. Fabulous. Once you've chosen that image, just keep that in your head. I'm going to model to you the first steps that we will be doing today in order to start to draw our image. And I have chosen an image, and I've gone with the old fire station, the middle image, today. So the first thing that you're going to do is that we need to divide our page into 4 pieces, and I have done that with each one of the images on the screen as well. So we're going to divide our page into 4 pieces. Now I'm going to try and jump between my screen, let's see how this goes, and the visualizer, so I can show you what I'm going to do on my page. And here's my visualizer. There I am. This might be working. This is good. So I've got my A4 piece of paper. Let's see if I can make myself a little bit bigger. I'm not sure if I can. Oh, there we go. So I've got the full screen. That's my A4 page. I've actually got 2 pieces of paper. I'll stick that to one side. And I've got a ruler. So I'm going to find the middle point with my finger initially. When I'm happy, you might want to ask somebody to help you. If you're not too good with using a ruler, what does Mrs. Schofield always say? You have a partner to help you. So you're going to draw a line down the middle very lightly. Do not do this line too hard. This is your planning grid. These are construction lines. And at the end of the day, when we finished our drawings, we'd actually like to erase these lines. So we're just going to press lightly. We don't want them to be too hard. So I've actually pressed so lightly that you can hardly see those lines, but you can see I've got a grid on my page, and my grid, I've placed a line halfway down the page and halfway across the page, approximately in the middle of the page. So for now, I'd like you to pause your video and complete your grid on your page. When you've completed the grid, unpause the video and come back to me. Brilliant. That's good. Get back. If you made a mistake with that grid, you need to do it again. You need to do it again, because this grid is our basic planning grid. We need to get this right to help us support us with our proportions. So we've got my planning grid, and I am going to go on to the image that I'm using today. I just want to go through the task before we do that, just to remind you. So you had to select an image, you've drawn a grid on your page with a ruler, and now we're moving on to step 3. We have to use basic shapes faintly, say it after me, faintly, lightly, to sketch out those lines and those main shapes. I don't want to see you using a ruler at this point, okay? If you are going to use a ruler, be assured Mrs. Schofield is watching you from somewhere. You're not going to be using a ruler. You are going to just be using your sketching lines really, really faintly and focusing on accurate proportions. Now, to help you, I have got a little picture. So you are going to do this on the image that you choose. So what I suggest you do, you stop the video on the image that you would like to choose. Okay, so I've chosen this image, so this is the page I'm going to go back to, but I'm also just going to flash the other pages before you and just hold it there for 3 seconds. So if you wish to go back to that image, you know where it is, you know when to stop the video. If you wish to go back to this image, stop the video. So great. Okay, so this is the image I've chosen, and the first step, the first thing I did is that I thought about it in terms of basic shapes. And you can see on the screen what thoughts, these are almost like my thoughts going through my head. So I thought the top of the old fire station was a triangle, and the body of the building was a square, but I noticed that the square came out towards the edges. So I'm going to think about the main basic shapes, the biggest shapes to start with. And I can also see that centre line to help me. So I'm going to show you this. I nearly forgot. I'm actually going to show you this on the visualizer. So let's go back out of this and we'll pop it onto the visualizer. And maybe I can stick, oh Mr. Visualizer, come back now. I'm going to pop it onto the visualizer. I'm going to make that a little bit bigger. I'm going to move my head so I'm not in the way, so you can see what you're doing. So I've got those construction, that planning grid, and I'm going to think now about those basic shapes. Now I'm lucky enough to have the image in front of me, so I'm looking at that image. Now I know that that triangle is at approximately at that point. I'm going to flash back to the image actually, and just going to make myself some markers, and then I'll show you what I've done. And flash back to my visualizer. So I put some markers for my first shape, for my triangular shape. Now when I looked at that image, I noticed that the triangle didn't stop at that center line. It was above the center line. So I'm just going to lightly, can you see I'm not using, sorry, that's my little assistant getting her arm in the way. I'm not using solid lines, I'm not using a ruler, I'm just lightly sketching out those lines and joining up those points. There we go. Joining up those points, light sketching lines. Now, that's my first basic shape. And we're going to flash back to that onto the PowerPoint. So there's my first basic shape. Now, you can't see what I'm doing. It's a little bit hard to show you on the visualizer, but I'm just going to mark out the points of that main part of the building. Okay? And I'm going to mark out those points, and I'm going to come back to you. Hopefully you're kind of sort of getting the idea. So there's my roof. Nice faint construction lines, keeping them nice and light. They're not solid lines, they are sketching lines, joining up those points. Still thinking about my proportions. And then I had, the building wasn't quite square, so joining that up. You can see how I've used the whole page as well. Once I've done that, I'm not going to carry on modelling the use of basic shapes. I want to go back to the PowerPoint and just talk about what I'm going to do next. So I'm going to do the clock area as well as the two chimneys, or the side pieces. I'm not sure if there are chimneys, these rectangular pieces. Once I've done that, I can move on to do the main shape of the window, the door, the arch above the door, and from that point, once you've got all those main shapes in place, I want you to stop for today. I don't want you to continue. I want you to make sure your proportions are accurate and that you've focused on those main shapes. So you're going to be adding in, if you choose this image, you're going to be adding in these two structures, clock at the top, window, doors, the archway above the door, and those bigger details. The finer details, like the bricks and the tone and the texture, we're going to be adding those details next week. We're not focusing on today, adding them next week. If you'd like to add a few more details, that's fine, but I really wanted to talk about tone and texture next week. So you can stop the video if you like at that point and get on with doing those basic shapes and thinking about your proportions and using your planning grid. I'm just going to flash those pictures for you again. Those were the drawings we looked at today. Remember, choose one based on your skills. When you have drawn out those basic shapes, you can come back to the video, and I want you to think about this as your cleanery. Did you choose an appropriate image? Did you choose an image that you were able to be successful at? Were you able to use that ruler to draw a grid? Okay, did you do it independently or did you need help? Have you been practicing using those faint construction lines? Did you make sure you used your feathery lines? How did you hold your pencil? How can you hold your pencil in order to make those lines really faint and feathery? Did you use basic shapes to help you? Okay, if you're struggling to draw those basic shapes, use Mrs. Schofield's tip that she always tells you to use, and that is draw it first with your finger on the page, and when you feel comfortable, drop the pencil down. And then my star challenge question, which I hope lots of you were able to achieve this week. Were you able to use accurate proportions, and have you filled your page? If you've done all of those things, then you are ready for next week. Next week, we're going to start to add details. So we're going to look at the tone and texture, we're going to start to add those details. So if you're looking at those bricks on the walls, we're going to start to think about how can we actually show that the tone and the texture of those bricks. And finally, you're going to upload your work to Google Classroom. Take a photo of it and upload it, and I will get to see them, which is very, very exciting. You do not need to upload this week's work. All I want you to do with it is keep it in a safe place. I'm going to finish on this screen so that you've got all the buildings in front of you that we spoke about today. And maybe at this point you can just have a look at the buildings, have a look at the building that you're focusing on, put on some nice relaxing music like we do in the classroom, and study the building that you are studying today, and just have some time by yourself focusing on the building and drawing using those faint construction lines. Well, I hope you had fun today. I will see you next week. Look after yourselves.